Keanu Reeves pulled up to the studios of The View in a black SUV, not the flashy limousine many celebrities might have chosen. The autumn morning in New York was crisp, with golden leaves swirling across the parking lot as he stepped out, wearing a simple dark suit and his hair slightly tousled from the wind. He paused to thank his driver before turning toward the building where fans had gathered despite the early hour. "Good morning," he said with a genuine smile to the security guard who held the door. The man, who introduced himself as Tony, mentioned that his daughter was a huge fan. Without hesitation, Keanu took out a small notebook from his jacket pocket, wrote a kind note, and signed it. "What's her name?" he asked. "Lily," replied Tony, visibly touched by the gesture. This was typical Keanu, the small kindnesses that rarely made headlines but defined who he was. Inside the building, production assistants bustled around with clipboards and headsets. A young woman with bright red-framed glasses approached him nervously. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Becky, one of the production assistants. I'll be taking you to the green room." She seemed to be struggling to maintain her professional composure. "Please call me Keanu," he said, following her through the maze of hallways. He noticed she was carrying a stack of papers that kept threatening to spill. "Would you like some help with those?" he offered. Becky blushed. No, I've got it. But thank you." Not many guests would even notice. As they walked, Keanu asked her questions about her job, how long she'd been with the show, what her aspirations were. By the time they reached the green room, Becky was chatting comfortably about her dream of becoming a director one day. "That's awesome," Keanu said. "You know, I've worked with some great directors. It's all about vision and people skills. You seem to have both." He meant it. In his years in Hollywood, he'd learned to recognize genuine talent. The green room of The View was well appointed but not extravagant. A coffee station sat in one corner, a spread of pastries and fruit in another. A television mounted on the wall showed the live feed of the studio where the hosts were currently discussing the day's hot topics. A harried-looking man in a headset popped his head in. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Dave, the floor manager. You're on in about 20 minutes. Can I get you anything?" "I'm good, thanks. And please call me Keanu." He settled into a comfortable chair and pulled out the worn paperback he'd been reading, a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. He wasn't one for scrolling through his phone before appearances. Reading helped center him. The makeup artist, an older woman named Gloria, who mentioned she'd been with the show since its beginning, applied minimal touches to his face. "You don't need much," she said. "Good bones and good living show on the skin." They chatted about her grandchildren as she worked, and Keanu listened with genuine interest. A producer stepped in next, a tall woman who introduced herself as Nancy. "We're thrilled to have you today," she said, handing him a card with rough talking points. "The hosts are particularly excited about discussing your new film, Midnight Horizon, and of course the charity work you've been doing." Keanu nodded, scanning the card. "Sounds good. Is there anything specific I should be prepared for?" Nancy hesitated slightly. "Well, Joy sometimes likes to go off script. She might bring up current events. Nothing to worry about, though." She smiled reassuringly, but there was something in her expression that seemed cautious. "I understand," Keanu replied. Throughout his career, he'd become adept at gracefully redirecting conversations away from topics he preferred to keep private. His political views, personal relationships, and the tragedies he'd faced were areas he generally avoided in public forums. From the television, he could hear the audience applauding as the show returned from commercial break. Whoopi Goldberg was announcing the upcoming segments, mentioning his name with enthusiasm. The audience cheered loudly at the mention. Dave returned. 5 minutes, Mr. Reeves. We'll head to the stage in 3. Keanu thanked him and put away his book. He took a deep breath, centering himself. Despite decades in the spotlight, he still felt a flutter of anticipation before public appearances. Not quite nervousness, more a heightened awareness of the energy he was about to step into. Backstage, he could hear the buzz of the audience during the commercial break. The sound technician, a young man with a streak of blue in his hair, fitted him with a microphone. "Big fan, Mr. Reeves. The Matrix changed my life." "Thanks, man. What's your name?" "Jackson?" "Well, Jackson, sound engineers like you make us actors look good. Appreciate your work." The young man beamed. As they waited for his cue, Keanu noticed the wall of photos featuring past guests. Presidents, musicians, actors, authors, decades of conversations captured in these images. He spotted one of himself from a previous appearance years ago, smiling alongside Barbara Walters. Dave's voice cut through his thoughts. 30 seconds. From the studio he could hear Whoopi's voice. Coming up next. He's one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, known for his kindness off-screen as much as his intense performances on-screen. He's here today to talk about his new film Midnight Horizon and his charitable foundation. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. That's you, Dave said with a smile, gesturing toward the stage. The lights were bright as Keanu walked onto the set. The audience rose to their feet, applauding wildly. He raised his hand in his signature wave, not too enthusiastic, genuine, but reserved. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, truly touched by the warm reception. The set of The View was arranged in its familiar semicircle, the hosts seated around the table. Whoopi stood to greet him with a hug. Welcome back, man. It's been too long. Joy Behar extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Keanu, always good to see you. There was something in her tone that echoed the producer's earlier hesitation. Sunny Hostin greeted him warmly, mentioning she'd just watched John Wick with her teenage son. He thinks you're the coolest, she said with a laugh. The newest co-host, Anna, seemed almost starstruck as she shook his hand. My whole family loves your work, she said. As Keanu took his seat in the guest chair, he surveyed the studio audience briefly. Faces of all ages looked back at him eagerly. In the front row, a woman held a small sign that read, "Breathtaking," a reference to his famous line from Toy Story 4 that had become something of a meme. So, Keanu, Whoopi began as the applause died down. Welcome back to The View. It's been a while since you've been on our show. It's good to be here, he replied, his voice carrying its familiar gentle rasp. Thank you for having me. Your new film Midnight Horizon opens this Friday, Whoopi continued. And I have to say I got to see an early screening and it blew me away. For those who haven't seen the trailers, can you tell us a bit about it? Keanu leaned forward slightly, his passion for the project evident. It's a story about redemption, really. My character is a former astronaut who's lost his way after a mission goes wrong. Years later, he gets a chance to make things right when the space program faces a new crisis. It's about second chances and finding purpose again. The special effects are incredible, Sunny added. Those space sequences look so real. Keanu nodded. Our director insisted on as many practical effects as possible. We actually filmed in zero-gravity environments for some scenes, using the same planes that astronauts train in. It was intense but amazing. The audience murmured appreciatively. Someone called out, "We love you, Keanu," causing a ripple of laughter. He smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. What I love about your career, Anna said, is that you move between these big action films and smaller, more thoughtful projects. How do you choose your roles? It's really about the story, Keanu answered, settling more comfortably into the conversation. Does it move me? Is there something meaningful there? And the people too. I want to work with passionate, creative people who care about what they're making. As the segment continued, the studio felt warmer, the lights brighter. Keanu accepted a mug of water from a production assistant, who quietly approached from the side. The conversation flowed naturally to his motorcycle collection, his bass guitar playing with his band Dog Star, and anecdotes from filming. The audience laughed as he recounted a mishap during a stunt sequence. So there I am, hanging from this wire 40 feet up, and suddenly I hear this ripping sound. The studio filled with laughter as he mimicked his own expression of panic. This was the Keanu people loved, humble, self-deprecating, genuine. No one in the studio, least of all Keanu himself, could have predicted how drastically the mood would shift in just a few minutes. For now, he was simply enjoying the conversation, completely unaware that this appearance on The View would soon become one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. The audience was still laughing at Keanu's stunt mishap story when Whoopi smoothly transitioned the conversation. You know, besides your acting career, you're known for something else that many people admire, your charitable work. But you don't talk about it much. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, his expression warming but also taking on that hint of shyness that emerged whenever his philanthropy came up. He'd been running a private foundation for years, funding children's hospitals and cancer research, but rarely discussed it publicly. It's just something that matters to me, he said simply. There are a lot of good organizations doing important work. I'm fortunate enough to be able to support some of them. Sonny leaned forward. But it's more than just writing checks, isn't it? I heard you visited the pediatric ward at Memorial Hospital while you were filming in the city last month. No cameras, no publicity. A flicker of surprise crossed Keanu's face. He hadn't expected anyone to know about that visit. He'd spent an afternoon reading to children, signing autographs, and simply sitting with families going through difficult times. Those kids are the real heroes, he said, deflecting the praise. Their courage is remarkable. When you see a 6-year-old facing challenges most adults would crumble under, with a smile on their face. It puts things in perspective, the audience murmured appreciatively. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear. Speaking of perspective, Joy said, her tone shifting subtly. You've been in Hollywood for decades. You've seen it change. What do you think about how political the entertainment industry has become? The question landed like a pebble in still water, creating small ripples of tension. Keanu took a sip from his mug, buying himself a moment to consider his response. Throughout his career, he had masterfully avoided being drawn into political debates. It wasn't that he didn't have opinions, he simply believed some things were best kept private. The industry has always reflected what's happening in society, he answered carefully. Artists often engage with the issues of their time. Joy wasn't satisfied with this diplomatic response. But don't you think celebrities have a responsibility to use their platform to speak out on important issues? The studio seemed to grow quieter. Anna glanced at Joy with slight concern, while Sonny studied Keanu's face. I think everyone has to decide that for themselves, Keanu replied. For some artists, their work is their statement. Others are more comfortable being vocal about their views. And which are you? Joy pressed. Whoopi, sensing the change in atmosphere, tried to steer back to safer ground. You know, speaking of your work, there's a scene in your new movie where your character has to make a difficult moral choice. Can you tell us about that? Keanu began to respond, but Joy cut in. Actually, I'm interested in Keanu's answer about celebrity responsibility, especially with everything happening right now. The camera caught a brief exchange of glances between the producers standing off stage. Dave, the floor manager, touched his headset as if receiving instructions. Keanu maintained his composure, though those familiar with his expressions might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. I believe my responsibility is to do my work with integrity, to treat people with kindness and to help where I can. Beyond that, he gave a small shrug. I'm just an actor. Just an actor with millions of followers and tremendous influence, Joy countered. Don't you think staying silent on certain issues is actually taking a stance? The studio had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the audience seemed to be holding their collective breath. I think there's value in listening more than speaking sometimes, Keanu said. His voice remained gentle, but there was a new firmness to it, especially on complex issues where thoughtful conversation gets lost in shouting matches. Sonny jumped in. Let's talk about Midnight Horizon again. The early reviews are calling it your best performance since The Matrix. For a moment, it seemed the conversation would return to the intended topic. Keanu nodded gratefully to Sonny. That's very kind. The whole team worked incredibly hard. Before we move on completely, Joy interrupted, there's this bill currently in Congress that would directly impact the film industry. I'm curious where you stand on it. Nancy, the producer who had briefed Keanu earlier, was now making subtle cutting gestures from beside the camera. A commercial break was scheduled soon, but not soon enough. Keanu set his mug down carefully. To be honest, Joy, I'd need to study the details of the bill more closely before commenting. I don't think it's helpful to speak on legislation I haven't thoroughly researched. But the basics of the bill are pretty straightforward, Joy persisted. It would affect funding for independent films, which you've supported throughout your career. The red light on one of the cameras began to blink, signaling 2 minutes until a commercial break. What I know about filmmaking is that nothing is as straightforward as it seems, Keanu replied, maintaining his calm. There are always unintended consequences to consider. That's why I prefer to be fully informed before taking public positions. Some might call that fence-sitting, Joy said with a small laugh that didn't soften the comment. Whoopi intervened more firmly this time. We all approach these things differently. When we come back, we'll talk more about Midnight Horizon and maybe get some inside scoop on whether there's another John Wick in the works. As the show cut to commercial, the on-set tension didn't dissipate. Usually during breaks, the hosts and guests would chat casually, but now there was an awkward silence. A makeup artist hurried on stage to touch up the host's makeup. Keanu declined with a polite shake of his head when she gestured toward him. "You doing okay?" Whoopi asked him quietly, concern evident in her eyes. "I'm fine," Keanu assured her with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Across the stage, Joy was in a hushed conversation with Nancy, the producer, gesturing emphatically. Though their words weren't audible, their body language suggested disagreement. Sonny leaned over to Keanu. "Sorry about that. The conversation sometimes takes unexpected turns." "It's live television," Keanu replied with a shrug that conveyed understanding, if not comfort. Anna, the newest host, looked uncomfortable with the situation, but unsure how to help smooth things over. Dave approached Keanu with a bottle of water. "We're back in 60 seconds, he said, then added in a lower voice, "You're handling this like a pro." Keanu accepted the water with a nod of thanks. Throughout his decades in Hollywood, he'd faced difficult interviews before, though usually he could anticipate them. This ambush, because that's what it felt like now, had caught him off guard. As the seconds ticked down to returning live, Keanu took a deep breath. His public persona had always been built on kindness and calm, and he wasn't about to abandon that now. Still, there was a limit to what even he would tolerate. The floor director counted down, 5, 4, then silently mouthed, 3, 2, 1 before pointing to Whoopi. "Welcome back to The View," she began smoothly. "We're here with Keanu Reeves talking about his new film Midnight Horizon. Let's show a clip." The monitors displayed a tense scene from the movie, Keanu's character making a difficult decision that would save many lives but cost him personally. The audience watched in rapt attention as the character delivered an emotional monologue about sacrifice and duty. When the clip ended, there was spontaneous applause. "That's powerful stuff," Sonny said. "What was it like filming that scene? It feels so raw." Keanu's passion for his craft visibly reignited as he described the technical and emotional challenges of the scene. "We shot that near the end of production, so by then I'd been living with this character for months. His struggle felt very real to me. We did 17 takes, and the director used elements from several of them in the final cut. The scene touches on the idea of personal sacrifice for the greater good," Anna observed. "It's a theme that runs through a lot of your films." Keanu nodded, appreciating her insight. "I'm drawn to characters who are wrestling with those kinds of choices. What do we owe each other? What are we willing to give up for something bigger than ourselves? Those questions fascinate me." For several minutes, the conversation flowed naturally again. The audience seemed to relax, laughing at Keanu's behind-the-scenes stories and hanging on his thoughtful reflections about the craft of acting. Then Joy spoke up again. "Speaking of sacrifice for the greater good, don't you think that applies to real life too? To public figures using their voice for important causes, even when it might cost them something professionally?" The moment of respite evaporated instantly. Whoopi shot Joy a warning look that viewers at home could clearly see. Keanu's expression remained composed, but his posture had stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I think we all find our own ways to contribute," he said. "Some are more visible than others. But visibility is the point, isn't it?" Joy pressed. "When someone with your level of fame takes a stand, people notice. They might reconsider their own views, or they might just dig in deeper," Keanu countered, his voice still even. "I'm not convinced that celebrities weighing in on divisive issues helps bridge any divides. So you're saying celebrities should just stay in their lane?" Joy's tone had taken on an edge. "I'm saying that thoughtful conversation requires more than sound bites and public declarations," Keanu replied, "and that sometimes the most meaningful actions happen away from the spotlight." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Audience members exchanged glances. The other hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable. Nancy was now standing directly in front of the camera, making more urgent signals to wrap up the segment. The red light blinked again, another commercial break approaching. "We need to take a break," Whoopi announced, cutting through the tension. "When we come back, we'll talk about Keanu's upcoming projects and take some questions from our audience." As the show cut to commercial, the atmosphere on set had changed entirely from the warm welcome Keanu had received less than 40 minutes earlier. Whatever happened in the next segment would determine whether this appearance would be remembered as just another talk show interview or something much more memorable. During the commercial break, the tension on set was thick enough to touch. Production assistants hovered uncertainly at the edges of the stage, exchanging worried glances. Nancy, the producer, had pulled Whoopi aside for a hurried conversation, their heads bent close together as they spoke in low, urgent tones. Keanu remained in his seat, taking slow sips of water. His face betrayed little emotion, but the slight tapping of his finger against the side of his mug suggested he wasn't as calm as he appeared. He'd built a career on being the most laid-back guy in Hollywood, but even he had his limits. Joy was flipping through some note cards, seemingly unbothered by the atmosphere she'd created. When she caught Keanu looking her way, she offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dave approached Keanu cautiously. "We've adjusted the segment a bit," he said quietly. "We'll go straight to audience questions after the break." Keanu nodded, grateful for the change. Audience questions were usually lighthearted, fans asking about favorite movies or memorable moments from his career. Sunny leaned toward Keanu from her seat at the table. "You're handling this beautifully," she whispered. "Just 10 more minutes." The makeup artist darted in for last-minute touch-ups before the return from commercial. As she powdered Keanu's forehead, she murmured, "My brother works at that children's hospital you visited. Said you spent hours with those kids. Thank you for that." Her simple words centered him, a reminder of what actually mattered beyond this uncomfortable television appearance. 5 seconds, called Dave, and the red light on the camera blinked on. Whoopi welcomed viewers back with her characteristic warmth, though there was a new firmness in her voice. "We're talking with Keanu Reeves about his new film Midnight Horizon, which opens this Friday. Now we promised some audience questions." She gestured toward a woman in the second row who stood, microphone in hand. "Hi, Keanu. I've been a fan since Bill and Ted. My question is, of all your characters, which one do you think is most like the real you?" Keanu's posture relaxed visibly at the simple, familiar question. "That's tough," he said, considering. "Probably Ted has my optimism. John Wick has my love of dogs." The audience laughed. "But maybe the closest would be Jack from Speed, just trying to do the right thing in a difficult situation. Figuring it out as he goes along." Several more audience questions followed. Favorite filming locations, whether he did his own stunts if there would be another Matrix film. The mood in the studio lightened with each exchange, the earlier tension beginning to dissipate. Then Joy broke in, cutting off Whoopi as she was about to call on another audience member. "I have a question that I think many of our viewers are wondering about." She turned to Keanu. "Your new film deals with themes of responsibility and sacrifice. Given recent events and laws being passed that affect vulnerable communities, don't you think people with influence have a duty to speak up?" The studio went silent. Anna closed her eyes briefly in what looked like dismay. Sunny straightened in her chair, lips pressed together. Keanu set down his mug, his movements deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, forcing everyone to listen carefully. "I think we're circling back to the same conversation, Joy." "Because you haven't really answered the question," she replied. "Actually, I believe I have. I've made it clear that I prefer to keep certain views private. That's my choice, and I'd appreciate it being respected. But when silence benefits those in power..." Whoopi interrupted, her voice carrying authority earned through decades in the industry. "Joy, let's move on. We have more audience questions." "The audience might be interested in this question too," Joy insisted, turning to face the crowd. "Wouldn't you all like to know where Keanu stands on these important issues?" There was scattered applause, but most of the audience looked uncomfortable. A middle-aged man in the back called out, "Let him be! We're here for the movie!" Nancy was now standing directly in front of the main camera, making a throat-cutting gesture that everyone could see. The other producers were huddled together, clearly discussing damage control options. Joy ignored them all, turning back to Keanu. "Your silence on these issues feels like a statement in itself. Don't you think that sends the wrong message to your fans?" Something shifted in Keanu's expression, a hardening around the eyes, a firmness to his jaw. When he spoke, his voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. "What I think," he said carefully, "is that public figures are often pushed to make quick pronouncements on complex issues, to pick sides in a tweet or a soundbite. I've never found that approach helpful. So you're neutral on human rights? On equality? Joy pressed. I didn't say that. A hint of frustration crept into his voice for the first time. What I'm saying is that my views on those issues are expressed in how I live my life, how I treat people, and where I put my resources. I don't believe that making public declarations for the sake of appearances accomplishes much. That sounds like a convenient excuse to avoid taking a stand, Joy said dismissively. The atmosphere in the studio had grown so tense that a production assistant dropped a clipboard backstage, causing several people to jump at the sudden noise. I've taken many stands in my life. Joy, Keanu replied, his voice now carrying an edge rarely heard from the famously gentle actor. I just don't always issue press releases about them. Whoopi tried again to redirect the conversation. We need to wrap up soon. Keanu, can you tell us about your experience working with director Ava Chen on this project? For a moment, it seemed the intervention might work. Keanu took a breath, visibly trying to shift mental gears. Ava is brilliant. She has this unique vision. Before we completely change the subject, Joy cut in again, I want to bring up something specific. There's a charity event next month for an organization that's been criticized for its stance on several issues. You're listed as an attendee. Do you support their positions? The question crossed a line. It wasn't just pushing for a political statement now. It was an attempt to create a gotcha moment on national television. The change in Keanu was subtle, but unmistakable. The easygoing demeanor that had made him beloved by fans and colleagues alike gave way to something harder, more guarded. His shoulders squared slightly, his gaze directly meeting Joy's for the first time. I attend dozens of charity events each year, he said, many support causes like cancer research, which has personal significance to me. I research the organizations I support, but I don't issue statements justifying each appearance. This particular organization has taken controversial positions. Joy. Whoopi's voice cut through the tension like a knife. It wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. That's enough. The viewers have a right to know her. We're moving on, Whoopi insisted. Keanu, tell us about working with Ava Chen. Joy wasn't finished. It's a simple question. Does he support? It's not a simple question, Keanu interjected, his usually measured voice raised just enough to command attention. And this isn't the forum for it. I came here to discuss my film, not to be ambushed with loaded questions about my personal beliefs or to have my character questioned based on assumptions. The audience had gone completely still. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure where to focus. Nobody's ambushing you, Joy said with a dismissive wave. These are legitimate questions that public figures should be prepared to answer. Keanu shook his head slightly. There's a difference between a thoughtful discussion and what's happening here. And what exactly is happening here? Joy's tone had grown defensive. An attempt to create controversy where none exists, Keanu replied evenly, to force statements that can be taken out of context for headlines. From the corner of his eye, he could see Dave frantically signaling for another commercial break. Nancy had disappeared, presumably to make urgent calls to the network executives. We'll take a quick break, Whoopi announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. We'll be right back with more from Keanu Reeves. As soon as the red light blinked off, the set erupted into motion. Production assistants rushed forward. Whoopi turned to Joy, saying something that the microphones didn't catch but that made Joy's expression harden. Sunny approached Keanu. I am so sorry about this, she said quietly. This isn't what we discussed in the pre-interview. Keanu nodded, his face unreadable. He stood slowly, removing his microphone with careful movements. What are you doing? Asked Anna, alarm evident in her voice. I think it's best if I go, Keanu said simply. Dave hurried over. Mr. Reeves, Keanu, please. We're adjusting the segment. When we come back, it will just be about the film, I promise. Keanu hesitated, weighing his options. In his 30-plus years in Hollywood, he'd never walked off a set. He'd sat through countless interviews, some awkward, some challenging, but he'd always seen them through with grace. Walking out mid-show would create exactly the kind of media circus he always avoided. But staying felt like tacit acceptance of how the interview had been conducted. Like allowing the conversation to be framed on someone else's terms. I appreciate that, he said to Dave, but I think enough has been said for today. As he stood, the audience, who could see what was happening even though they were off-air, began to murmur. Someone called out, "We love you, Keanu." Another voice added, "You tell him." Joy had risen from her seat as well, arms crossed. "If you leave now, people will draw their own conclusions," she said, the warning clear in her voice. Keanu paused, looking directly at her. They usually do, regardless of what's actually said. His voice wasn't angry. If anything, it carried a note of resignation. That's part of the problem. The commercial break was nearly over. Decisions needed to be made quickly. The producers huddled in an emergency meeting at the edge of the stage. Nancy's face was flushed as she spoke in hurried whispers with two network executives who had rushed down from their offices upstairs. This kind of situation, a major celebrity potentially walking off during a live broadcast, was the stuff of television nightmares. Keanu stood quietly backstage, his decision made but not yet acted upon. Becky, the production assistant who had first greeted him that morning, hovered nearby, distress evident on her face. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reeves," she said softly. "This isn't how things usually go." He gave her a small smile. "Not your fault. And please, it's still Keanu." Dave rushed over, phone in hand. "We've got 40 seconds until we're back on air. The network president is asking if you'll reconsider. We can restructure the segment completely. No more questions from Joy, just Whoopi wrapping up with talk about the movie release dates and your upcoming projects." Keanu considered this. Walking out would create headlines, exactly the kind of attention he typically avoided. Staying might be the path of least resistance. But then he thought about what had just transpired, the repeated attempts to corner him, the dismissal of his boundaries, the clear agenda at play. Throughout his career, he'd been known for his kindness, but kindness wasn't the same as being a pushover. "I appreciate the offer," he said to Dave, "but I think it's best if I go. Please extend my apologies to the audience and to the other hosts." Dave looked crestfallen but nodded. "I understand. I'll have security escort you out the back way to avoid the press that's always camped outside. Thank you." Keanu handed over his microphone pack. Back on set, the countdown to live broadcast had begun. The hosts had retaken their seats, though the usual pre-camera banter was notably absent. Joy sat stiffly, arms crossed, while Whoopi's expression was thunderous. Sonny and Anna exchanged worried glances. Nancy approached the host quickly. "Keanu has decided to leave," she said in a low voice. "Whoopi, you'll need to explain his absence when we return." "Can't imagine why he'd want to leave," Whoopi said, her sarcasm barely concealed as she glanced pointedly at Joy. "He was being oversensitive," Joy replied. "These are reasonable questions for a public figure." "Not the way you were asking them," Sonny muttered. 5 seconds, called the floor director. Cutting off further discussion, the red light blinked on and the view was live again. The camera panned across the host's table, revealing Keanu's empty seat to the audience for the first time. A collective murmur of surprise rippled through the studio. Someone called out, "Where's Keanu?" Another voice added, "Bring him back." Whoopi raised her hands, calling for quiet. "As you can see, Keanu Reeves has left the building." Her tone carried a weight of disappointment that wasn't directed at their absent guest. "We want to thank him for joining us today to discuss his new film Midnight Horizon, and which opens nationwide this Friday." The camera caught Joy's expression, a mixture of defiance and something that might have been regret. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but a look from Whoopi silenced her. "We'll be right back with our next segment," Whoopi continued smoothly, years of professional experience allowing her to navigate this unexpected situation. As the show cut to another commercial, chaos erupted in the studio. Audience members were on their feet, some calling out questions, others expressing disappointment. The producers scrambled to reconfigure the remaining segments of the show, while the network executives huddled in a corner, already discussing damage control strategies. Meanwhile, Keanu was being led through the backstage labyrinth by a security guard named Pete. "Been working here 15 years, Pete told him as they walked. "Never seen anything like what happened today." "Sorry to cause trouble," Keanu replied. Pete shook his head. "You didn't cause it, if you don't mind me saying so. Some people just don't know when to let up." They passed the green room where Keanu had waited earlier that morning. A lifetime ago, it seemed. He paused to collect his book and jacket. "Mr. Reeves," came a voice from the doorway. He turned to see Tony, the security guard from the entrance, standing there looking concerned. Your drivers brought the car around to the service entrance. There's already photographers gathering out front. Word's gotten out somehow. News travels fast, Keanu said with a wry smile. Always does in this business, Tony agreed. For what it's worth, sir, most of the staff here thinks you handled yourself with class. Not many would have kept their cool that long. Keanu thanked him with a nod. As he prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a text from his agent. Call me ASAP. What happened? News of his walkout was already spreading through Hollywood's digital grapevine. By the time he reached his hotel, it would be trending on social media. By evening, the entertainment news shows would be running with it. Tomorrow, the morning shows would be dissecting it frame by frame. None of that was what Keanu wanted. Throughout his career, he'd intentionally kept a low profile, letting his work speak for itself. He'd never courted controversy or sought the spotlight outside of his film roles. This incident would thrust him into exactly the kind of media circus he'd always avoided. As these thoughts ran through his mind, Becky appeared again, slightly out of breath as if she'd been running. Mr. Reeves, Keanu, I just wanted to catch you before you left. She held out a small envelope. The audience members were passing this around when they heard you were leaving. They wanted you to have it. Puzzled, Keanu accepted the envelope and opened it. Inside was a card hastily signed by dozens of people, with messages scrawled in different handwritings. We support you. Thank you for standing up for yourself. Class act all the way. Sorry this happened. The simple gestures of support from strangers touched him deeply. He carefully tucked the card into his pocket. Thank you for bringing this, he said to Becky. It means a lot. She nodded, then blurted out, For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Some boundaries need to be respected. As they reached the service entrance, Keanu could see his driver waiting with the car. Beyond the security barrier, a small crowd of photographers had already gathered, alerted by the entertainment news grapevine that something newsworthy was happening. Is there another way out? He asked Tony, who had accompanied them. Not really, Tony replied apologetically, but we can bring the car closer and have security form a barrier if you'd prefer. Keanu considered this for a moment, then shook his head. No, that's okay. Running away would just make it seem like I did something wrong. He straightened his shoulders. I'll walk out normally. Pete looked at him with newfound respect. Most celebrities would be hiding their face right about now. I'm not hiding, Keanu said simply. I just stood up for myself. As they prepared to open the door, Keanu's phone rang. The screen showed his publicist calling, no doubt already fielding media inquiries about what had happened. He declined the call for now. There would be time for damage control later. The door opened and the bright flash of cameras greeted him immediately. Calls of Keanu. What happened with Joy? And why did you walk off the show? Filled the air. Keanu didn't run or hide his face. He walked calmly to his waiting car, acknowledging the photographers with a small nod but offering no comments. His expression was neither angry nor distressed, just resolved, perhaps with a hint of disappointment. As his driver held the car door open, a reporter pushed forward. Do you regret walking off the view, Keanu? He paused, considering whether to maintain his silence or offer some small statement to shape the narrative that would inevitably unfold. After a moment, he turned slightly toward the gathered press. I don't regret standing up for myself, he said quietly. There's a difference between a conversation and an ambush. With that, he slid into the car and closed the door, leaving the reporters with just enough of a quote to work with, but not enough to twist into something unintended. As the car pulled away, he took a deep breath, centering himself. His phone was already filling with notifications, text messages from friends who had somehow heard the news already, calls from his team, alerts from news apps that had picked up the story. For a moment, he considered turning it off completely, taking some time to process what had happened before dealing with the aftermath. But he knew that wasn't the responsible choice. People who cared about him would be worried. His film's publicity team would be scrambling to adjust their strategy. The studio executives would be concerned about how this might affect the movie's opening weekend. He sent a quick text to his agent. I'm fine. We'll call in 30 minutes to discuss. Nothing to worry about. Then he called his sister Kim, who answered immediately. Are you okay? I just got a call from someone saying you walked off the view. I'm okay, he assured her. It wasn't what I planned, but sometimes you have to draw a line. Good for you, she said firmly. You've always been too nice for your own good. What happened exactly? As Keanu began to explain, he realized that for the first time in his decades-long career, he had prioritized his own boundaries over the unwritten rules of celebrity appearances. It wasn't something he had planned or would have chosen, but now that it had happened, he felt a curious sense of peace with the decision. Whatever headlines came next, whatever spin was put on the incident, he knew he had remained true to himself. In the often artificial world of Hollywood, that counted for something. By the time Keanu's car reached his hotel, the story had already exploded online. Keanu Walks Off was trending, along with Your Respect Keanu and inevitably on The View drama. Video clips of the tense exchange were being shared thousands of times per minute, with viewers analyzing every expression and word. In the hotel lobby, several guests did double takes as he walked through, their faces showing the recognition of someone they'd just been reading about or watching in viral clips. The front desk manager approached discreetly. Mr. Reeves, if you'd prefer to use our service entrance to avoid any press that might gather, just let us know. Thank you, Keanu said with genuine appreciation. I'll keep that in mind. In his suite, he finally returned his publicist's call. Linda answered immediately, her voice a mixture of concern and professional calculation. Tell me exactly what happened, she said without preamble. Keanu recounted the interview as objectively as possible, describing the repeated attempts to draw him into political statements and the increasingly hostile tone. Linda sighed. I've already received calls from every entertainment outlet. The studio is concerned about how this might affect Midnight Horizon's opening weekend. Social media is blowing up. What's the overall reaction? Keanu asked, genuinely curious. He avoided social media himself, finding it more peaceful to stay disconnected from the constant stream of opinions. That's the interesting part, Linda said, and he could hear her scrolling through something as she spoke. It's overwhelmingly supportive of you. The clips make it pretty clear what was happening. Even people who disagree with what they assume your politics might be are saying the questioning went too far. This was somewhat surprising. In the current divisive climate, public opinion usually split along predictable lines regardless of the actual circumstances. The network called, Linda continued. They want to issue a joint statement with you to smooth things over. Something diplomatic about passionate discussions and mutual respect and so on. Keanu considered this. The path of least resistance would be to agree, to help everyone save face and move on. It was the Hollywood way. Conflicts happened behind the scenes all the time, but publicly, everything was always fantastic, and everyone was a joy to work with. What do you think? He asked. Linda was quiet for a moment. Professionally speaking, a joint statement would help contain the story. But personally, I think you did nothing wrong. If anything, you showed remarkable restraint. Through the hotel window, Keanu could see a small group of photographers already gathering across the street. The story was only going to get bigger. Let me think about it, he said finally. In the meantime, can you make sure the studio knows this won't affect my commitment to promoting the film? I'll do the rest of the scheduled interviews and appearances. Already told them that, Linda assured him. That's why they love working with you. Most actors would be canceling everything and hiding out after something like this. After ending the call, Keanu stood at the window, watching the city below. His phone continued to buzz with messages from friends and colleagues, but he needed a moment before diving back into the fray. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was room service with a lunch he hadn't ordered. The young waiter looked starstruck as he wheeled in the cart. Compliments of the hotel management, sir, he explained. And, I just wanted to say what happened this morning on The View. A lot of us thought you handled it really well. Thank you, Keanu said simply, offering a generous tip that the waiter tried to refuse. No, sir, please. It's an honor just to meet you. My brother's in the hospital right now. Cancer. And he told me about how you spent time visiting the kids' ward when you were filming here last year. Never told the press or anything. That means a lot to families going through tough times. This unexpected connection to what really mattered helped ground Keanu amid the swirl of media drama. He thanked the young man again and asked for his brother's name, promising to send something to the hospital for him. Alone again, Keanu checked his phone and found a text from his Midnight Horizon co-star Olivia. Just saw what happened. You okay? Call me if you want to talk. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." Before he could reply, his phone rang with a call from the film's director, Ava Chen. "I've been trying to reach you," she said when he answered. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he assured her. "Just dealing with the aftermath. I'm sorry if this affects the film's publicity." "Don't apologize," Ava said firmly. "I've watched the clips. You were put in an impossible position. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. The studio is suggesting we do some additional press to counteract any negative impact. Would you be up for a last-minute appearance on Morning Time tomorrow? They've offered us a full segment. No political questions, just focus on the film." Keanu didn't hesitate. "Of course. Whatever helps the film. That's why everyone loves working with you," Ava said warmly. "Most actors would be holed up with their lawyers right now." After they worked out the logistics, Keanu finally had a moment to process the morning's events. He opened his laptop to get a sense of how the story was playing out. The headlines varied widely. Keanu Reeves walks off the View. After heated exchange, Joy Behar's questioning pushes Keanu Reeves to breaking point. Keanu takes a stand. When celebrity interviews go too far, the View's ambush. Keanu Reeves refuses political litmus test. What surprised him most was the comment sections. In an era where online discussions typically devolved into angry opposing camps, there was remarkable consensus. Even people who identified themselves as fans of The View were largely saying the questioning had gone too far. One comment particularly stood out. "I don't know what Keanu's politics are, and that's actually refreshing. Not everything has to be a political statement." His agent called next with unexpected news. The studio tracking numbers for Midnight Horizon have jumped since this morning. Advanced ticket sales spiked in the last few hours. "That doesn't make sense," Keanu said, genuinely puzzled. "Actually, it does. People feel protective of you. You've built decades of goodwill in this industry. When they see someone being unfairly attacked, they rally around them. The publicity team thinks this could actually help the opening weekend, as strange as that sounds." By late afternoon, Keanu's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. It was Whoopi Goldberg. "Wanted to call you personally," she said. "What happened today wasn't right. You came to talk about your work and got ambushed instead." "I appreciate that," Keanu replied. "I've never walked off a set before. It wasn't a decision I made lightly." "You did what you had to do," Whoopi said. "For what it's worth, there were some heated discussions after you left. The network is taking it seriously." They spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation between two veterans of an industry they both loved, but sometimes found exasperating. There was no bitterness in their exchange, just mutual respect and a tacit acknowledgement that lines had been crossed. As evening approached, Keanu ordered room service rather than venturing out to face the photographers still camped outside. While waiting for his meal, he received yet another call, this one from the president of the network that aired The View. "Mr. Reeves, I want to personally apologize for your experience today," she began. "That's not how we want our guests to be treated. I understand that live television can be unpredictable," Keanu replied diplomatically. "Nevertheless, we have standards for how we treat people who graciously agree to appear on our shows."
"We're addressing the situation internally." Her tone made it clear that serious conversations were happening behind the scenes. She continued,
"We'd like to extend an invitation for you to return, on your terms, to promote your film properly. Of course, I completely understand if you decline." The offer surprised him. "I appreciate that. Let me think about it." After dinner, Keanu called Linda back regarding the joint statement the network had proposed earlier. "I've decided against it," he told her. "It feels like putting PR polish on something that shouldn't be glossed over." "What do you want to do instead?" she asked. "Nothing," he said simply. "No statements, no explanations, no social media posts. I'll do the Morning Time appearance tomorrow to support the film, but otherwise, I'd rather let my actions speak for themselves." Linda chuckled. "That is the most Keanu Reeves response ever, and honestly, it's probably the right call. Any statement would just extend the news cycle." As night fell, Keanu sat on the hotel room balcony, looking out at the city lights. His phone had finally stopped its constant buzzing as his team implemented his decision to make no official comment on the day's events. In an industry built on carefully crafted images and strategic messaging, sometimes silence spoke volumes. Throughout his career, he had let his work and his actions define him rather than public statements or political positions. Today had tested that approach but ultimately reinforced his belief in it. His sister Kim called one last time before he turned in for the night. "Just checking in. How are you holding up with all this attention?" "It's not my favorite thing," he admitted. "But it'll pass." "The internet loves you even more now if that's possible," she told him with a laugh. "There are all these posts about protecting Keanu at all costs and calling you the last pure thing in Hollywood." He laughed at the absurdity of it. "Hardly, just trying to stay true to myself." "Well, it's working," Kim said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day." As he prepared for bed, Keanu reflected on the strange day that had unfolded so differently from what he'd expected when he arrived at The View that morning. In his decades in Hollywood, he'd seen how quickly fortunes could change, how fame could be both a blessing and a burden. What mattered, he had always believed, wasn't what people said about you, but who you actually were when the cameras weren't rolling. Today, in an ironic twist, it had taken walking away from those cameras to remind everyone of that simple truth. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more publicity obligations, more opportunities to talk about the work he cared about. The drama would fade, as it always did in the relentless churn of entertainment news. What would remain was what had always defined him. Not grand statements or political positions, but the quiet integrity of showing up, doing the work, and treating people with kindness. It was enough. It had always been enough,